Imagine that over 40 years after your death, you are still in the hearts and minds of the people you served, and that one of them has created a show to share your legacy with the world.
Hello, my name is Marie Maber, and here we are at Brookdale Community College enjoying this beautiful show, Morris Blackburn and his legacy. Yay!
So who was this guy? The artist Morris Blackburn was born in 1902 in Philadelphia and spent his career in the city. After schooling at the Philadelphia Trade School and work in the Hog Island shipbuilding yard, he began his art training in 1922 at the Graphic Sketch Club. He studied at the Pennsylvania Academy from 1925 to 1929, winning 2 Crescent traveling scholarships. In the 1930s, he painted murals for the WPA. Around 1936, Blackburn attended the private classes of Arthur B. Carles, who became his close friend and mentor. He began his long teaching career in 1932. In 1952, Blackburn joined the faculty of the Pennsylvania Academy. Beginning as the Academy's first instructor in graphics, he ended up helping to develop a curriculum for first-year students. Using a wide variety of media, he worked both abstractly and representationally. He loved to paint scenes of coastal New Jersey and New Mexico. He died in 1979.
I started this project 32 years ago when I was a student in Philadelphia. I put it aside when I met my husband and moved out here to New Jersey. But things started to happen when I saw people posting on Facebook about Morris Blackburn. People were writing their memories of him, the cool things he said.
Last year, Brookdale Community College awarded Marie a sabbatical to do a deep dive into Mr. Blackburn.
I loved the research. He was a serious artist. He would work on 3 different paintings in the morning. He'd pull a couple of prints in the afternoon. He was always go, go, go.
The relentless pressure he put on himself to excel both as an artist and a teacher took a toll. He wrote, "I find that I am devoting more of my time and energy to teaching than is conducive to my best creative effort. An opportunity to paint for a period of time with a free mind would be of inestimable value to my morale as a painter." Fortunately, he won a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the Academy gave him a leave of absence from teaching. He apparently returned with renewed energy and dedication to his students.
He'd invite students to his home. Talking about art in the environment of friendship rather than class situation was really special.
Marie's relationship with him continued after her graduation.
I got to know Morris Blackburn's widow, Betty. She was very interested in having me come into his studio to help every now and then, which I gladly did. I learned a lot from him, whether I was working at the Print Club, Associated American Artists, Dolan Maxwell Gallery. All those shops carried his prints.
His prints were a big part of his artistic reputation. His expertise earned him a job in the graphics division of Philco during World War II.
Morris Blackburn was an early practitioner of making art using the silkscreen printmaking process, but he wasn't the first person to do so. Anthony Valonis had adapted the screen printing technique for artists' use and wrote 2 small handbooks about it, which were published by the Federal Art Project in 1936. Mr. Blackburn had sent for one of those booklets. This is one of Morris Blackburn's earliest screen prints. It's a very direct and casual image of his wife Betty, which was made in 1940. Here are the images that show the various states of this print of Betty. Each color required its own screen.
I understand there's a print by Mr. Blackburn that was just recently pulled.
The block was in the Academy teaching collection. I had the opportunity to borrow that block with the understanding and the agreement and actual contract that I would provide the Academy with 2 good quality prints, and then I was permitted to keep 2. And I did have a student assist me. We took an afternoon and pulled 4 more prints, and they came out well.
One of the cool things that Marie included is a case of the printing blocks that Blackburn used, along with the resultant images on a nearby wall. Artist Rhoda Rosenberg wrote, I met Morris Blackburn in 1962, my first year at the Pennsylvania Academy. I took an etching class that he taught. The print bug bit me, and for the past 50 years I've been making prints. I now understand the passion that he had for this process, and as a teacher of printmaking, I hope I can continue this legacy and inspire my students. Marie mentioned that Mr. Blackburn was represented by the Dolan Maxwell Gallery. I spoke to its current director.
I'm Ron Rumford. I did not know Morris Blackburn. He passed away before I came to Philadelphia. But we did several exhibitions, specifically on works from the 1940s. To me, they were a great revelation. He's an early practitioner of abstraction. You can see very clearly he's looking at some of the leading abstract American artists of the time. And by 1940, he's broken free and made purely abstract compositions. Because we worked with Blackburn's family, we had access to works from every period of his career. We had prints that he did in the 20s, and they're Whistler-esque, sketchy lines, atmospheric. And then by the mid-30s, things have become very solid. There's always a rigorous formal structure to his work. I'm doing a very major body of abstract work in the late 30s and 40s. The exhibitions in the 80s, there were 2 of them. They were great successes. The first was abstractions from the late 30s through the mid-40s. And even when he goes back to doing observational work, cityscapes, landscapes, the way he's organized them, the way he's reduced the shapes to rectilinear forms, that's very much informed by all the pure abstract work that he did. There's a clarity of thinking in the color, to me, that is what he was about.
The painting in the center, flanked by 4 Blackburns, is by the prominent artist Bill Scott.
Mr. Blackburn often spoke with me of his own teacher, Arthur B. Quarles. Quarles was a generation older. He had lived in Paris, known Matisse and Picasso, and in the first quarter of the 20th century, along with the artists Hugh Breckenridge, Earl Horder, and Henry McCarter, Quarles was one of the advocates for introducing modern art to Philadelphia. He taught from 1917 to 1940. In the 1930s, Blackburn had served as a monitor for Quarles, and he posed the models and set up still lifes. Early in his own career, I think Blackburn was profoundly influenced by Quarles' own painting. I studied etching and figure drawing with Mr. Blackburn when I was a student. Many older artists told me at the time I was lucky to study with him and implied that he was the last remnant of a time past. I didn't care at all for Mr. Blackburn's huge ego and what I experienced to be a difficult personality, but learned from him that I didn't need to like people to learn from them. He showed us visual ways to help solve painting problems that were helpful later when I was working alone in my studio.
Bill Scott is not the only person who could be put off by Mr. Blackburn's occasional arrogance. I myself felt that way at times when I knew him at PAFA. But the devotion of his admirers is profound. This beautiful abstraction is by Marie Nomikos, a wonderful artist who grew up in Millville, New Jersey. Mary is an Academy graduate, but her first training came from a woman who plays a major role in the story of Morris Blackburn. Art legend Pat Witt, through her Barn Studio of Art in Millville, New Jersey, and her outreach to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, has done more than anyone in uniting the South Jersey and Philadelphia art communities. In 1962, Pat opened the Barn, which would eventually teach generations of art students. In 1965, she met an artist who would become her mentor.
I studied with Morris Blackburn for nearly 15 years. And every now and then he would say, "Patricia, I want to cut your smock strings." I said, "But you haven't taught me everything." If I were to dedicate my art, I would dedicate it to Morris Blackburn, because this man, everything I have learned and put into practice was his philosophy, his psychology of art, every book he ever recommended. He knew gouache, he knew what he called wipeout. He had the greatest terminologies. The less is more, the pay as you go, dare to be lousy was his most famous saying. And I always said I never let him down. And I can teach any and every medium because I had a great teacher. If you have a great mentor, you'll just fly.
Pat owns a number of Blackburn artworks. Some were gifts from a generous teacher to a devoted student, but not all of them. She told me how she acquired what I think is one of his very best paintings.
This one is a good story. I had just recently gotten a divorce, and my car went with the divorce. I was glad to get rid of that man and my car too. And I started saving for a used car. I'd saved and saved and saved. So I had about $1,400. This painting was in a show, and I said to Mr. Blackburn, "I really love that painting." I said, "I would love to buy it." He said, "I don't think you can afford it." And he said, besides, the director of the Michigan Museum was interested in it. He said, "He's going to be telling me." I said, "But I can afford it. How much?" And he said, "I think it'll be about $1,500. I have that. I can buy it.
Instead of a car.
And he looked at me. "How can you?" I said, "I just saved money to buy a car. I'd rather have your painting." He said, "I won't know until tonight. You call me at midnight, and I'll tell you one way or the other."
Midnight.
At 12 midnight, I called, and he said, "Well, Patricia, it's your painting."
Mr. Blackburn's influence spread through Pat to other South Jersey artists like Nancy Mullock and Elizabeth Tasker. For years, Pat has brought Academy teachers who knew Blackburn down to her Barn studio to teach workshops. They include the great American landscape painter Louis Sloan. And Patrick Connors, who wrote, "I remember Mr. Blackburn's dictum that we should all reduce your subject to paint." This is a quotation that made quite an impression on me when I first heard it, and it continued to gain importance over the years. The fact that Blackburn would have heard that quote from one of his teachers, and that it may be attributed to Cecilia Bow, gives it a greater legacy and significance. It reminds me of how important legacy was to Blackburn, who would say of certain student work, that painting has no ancestry. Pat Witt's terrific assistant has some beautiful works in the show.
Hello, my name is Candice Fields. I am from the Barnes Studio of Art and studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, but my mentor is Pat Witt, and that is my connection to Morris Blackburn. Through Pat, I was able to learn many of Blackburn's lessons that she keeps and makes sure that they're being taught at the barn, like dare to be lousy, making sure that we are creating work and taking the chances on things because we're going to be lousy. But the more we do it, that repetition, and we're finding ourselves in it. As a teenager, I used to watch Pat's films she had, and in one of them, Blackburn walks in while she's teaching.
Would you like me to say something to you?
Oh, I'd love to.
Well, I'd just like to say momentarily that we had a wonderful afternoon from painting from under the Morris River Bridge, and it brought home to me again the difference between optical acuity and perception. In other words, you can have awfully good eyes and see nothing. And you can have aging eyes, as I have, and see the wonderment of the world around you.
And that really, through my life, just trying to make sure that I'm being aware of what's going on and being like a sponge, as Pat would say, so that you can take in everything you learn. I mean, without Pat holding on to Blackburn's knowledge, he wouldn't be a major part of my life. When I was at the academy and I decided to become a printmaker, it was okay because Blackburn was a printmaker. And his connection through Stanley Hayter and down the line, it just solidified the part of my lineage. So it's always great when someone gets all the work together, a part of someone's legacy, and you see that the work's different, and yet it's all connected. And Blackburn is that time-binding connection.
Morris Blackburn's classroom lectures were fascinating, and thankfully he recorded them. His widow Betty transcribed the recordings, and Marie, with the help of her English teacher mother, edited them into written form.
There's 60 lectures now that have been fully edited. I'm making them available to the Pennsylvania Academy Archives in honor of Mr. Blackburn.
Marie reads some excerpts from one of these lectures.
The study or awareness of Gestalt psychology can greatly benefit painters. It is the study of perception, the organized whole, and the quintessence of design. Your paintings will live in history because of the behavioral unity of the whole and not on the superficial aspects of style. In the classroom, I have demonstrated this principle by tearing pieces of paper in approximately equal size and throwing them at random on the floor. Starting with one piece, the addition of a second one will produce a tension line between them. A third will make something else, possibly a triangle or a curve. As each single piece is added, the whole group will change radically. Now, if a much smaller size is tossed into the group, it will not relate to the whole but will stand out as a target. As more of the smaller sizes are added, they form their own gestalt and make a grouping of their own. It becomes clear at once that birds of a feather flock together. The uneducated will tell you that they like a painting of a boat because they like boats. It has been generally understood among the people who do know that all art is abstract, a structured, unified whole.
Those of us who studied with them back in the 60s and 70s well remember those lectures, but it was his little quips, like "dare to be lousy," that really stuck with us. I eavesdropped on a conversation between two of the Blackburn legacy artists.
My name is Edgar Gerens, and I was a student of Morris Blackburn's at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts.
Hi, Larry Francis, a former student of Morris Blackburn. He had various ways of illustrating these ideas. Very memorable and easy to apply to all kinds of things. One of the things that he would talk about was the sound of the point.
I don't know that one. I'm curious to hear.
You have a form, the part of the form that strikes the hardest against the surrounding things. Like one side of a figure is black and it meets a white area behind it.
Dark against light.
Yeah, and the other side of the figure is gray and it meets a very similar gray. So your eye moves toward...
What I remember is accent passage.
Yeah, he he described it that way, but he also described it as the sound of the point. And I remember noticing that all of these Renaissance artists did this.
Yes.
Would emphasize the direction of the moving figures.
That your eye moves through part of the figure and then stops at other parts.
Yeah.
And then it might move it directionally through the curve of an arm. And you were talking about the color, right? What was that rule?
Throwing the stone in a pond with the circles of related colors fading as they moved out. So the idea being that you have a bright red spot in the painting, and then around that you may have smaller or less bright red spots.
Less chroma.
Yeah.
Well, a great painting that shows that is Delacroix's Liberty. The red of the flag gets echoed out. It's smaller and smaller as it goes out throughout this painting. He would hold up pieces of colored paper onto the paintings, and he talked about how there's an immediate impact of one color.
Yeah, he'd take a piece of a cigarette pack and he'd say, put a little stickum on it, which meant wet the back with your tongue and smack it on the painting. And often it was like to echo some color in another part of the painting.
One of the things he said that I still tell my students, don't make a federal case out of it. Meaning, show some subtlety. These rules are great. It's what I was looking for in art school. Was rules.
A way of structuring things and a way of thinking basically about stuff, aside from whatever the subject is.
Edgar Gerrans, Larry Francis, and Gilbert Lewis depict very recognizable subjects. Mr. Lewis is unfortunately in very poor health, but both the Pennsylvania Academy and the Woodmere Museum have shows slated for him next summer, which should be a real treat. Like his teacher, Stuart Shell has created both representational and abstract artworks. Stuart wrote, I met Morris Blackburn 42 years ago, my first year at the Academy, and felt that I was in the presence of a real artist. One day I said, Mr. Blackburn, when I'm looking out at the landscape, it's calling to me. The clouds are going by, light is moving, and it's all I can do to account for everything I'm seeing. But then, in the next moment, when I look back at the painting, it wants my focus equally, and I'm confused, realizing that I can't give them both equal attention. Blackburn responded, this is a question that is going to take you the rest of your life to answer because you've stumbled upon one of the primary thematic issues of working from observation. The dialectical relationship between what is being seen and the response you make to it in your work. Just remember that you can never simply take the landscape as it is and paste it down to the painting. The painting is always, no matter how specific, an interpretation and not a literal description. And when you bring the painting back inside, no one is going to know what you saw nor what you missed. So the ultimate reality for you is not with nature out there, but within the nature of the painting. And the degree to which you're able to communicate that reality to someone else. So you do whatever you need to do to get there. In the 1976 Welcome Mat article, Blackburn is quoted as saying, I feel like the drowning man who sees his life flash before him. I see the time bind between my teacher, Arthur B. Carles, and myself, my contemporaries, Franklin Watkins, Francis Spate, and Leon Karp. I see the connections of my family, my background, all the places that I've visited. It's an autobiography of self-expression influenced by the people who have been and still are a part of the chain of my life. Well, Mr. Blackburn, thanks to the efforts of Marie Maber and the many artists who you taught and inspired, new links keep getting added to the chain of your life. Marie, it's just an amazing show and you really need to be applauded. I'm gonna...
You know, I said to you already, John, you do this all the time. You help people. You bring the art, their projects out to the world. You probably inspired some of this, John, because I'm also doing that. But I was working in 2019 for the most part, which was exactly 40 years after his death. There was some kind of lyricism in that for me, that it was time. And I'm glad I could do it. I'm really glad. Thank you.
I am too. Thanks so much, Marie.
You're welcome.